Now, are you one of those designers that's really struggling with coming up with creative ideas, finding images, color palettes, and so on? Well, today we're going to take a look at how we can recreate a design like this using the hero image of a website using some AI tools, some color palette generating tools, and a healthy little dose of skills and knowledge. So if you're ready, let's just jump in and start creating. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a new frame for our design. So we're going to press F on the keyboard inside Figma, and we're going to come over and choose the desktop option, and there's our starting point. We'll rename this. We'll call this Hero Design. So now we have the dreaded blank sheet to look at and think, what do we go and create? Well, let's start off with jumping over into Midjourney and seeing if we can create some interesting looking images that we can start off with. Now we're going to be using a fictitious skiing company, so we want to have something that encapsulates that. We want to have some nice mountain ranges with some snow and just kind of really entice people. So let's jump over into Midjourney. As you can see, I've already been experimenting with a bunch of different prompts and so on, but we're going to start completely from scratch. So let's go ahead and type in imagine. And what do we want? Well, we want some snow-capped mountains, no, that kind of thing. So let's try that. We obviously want them to be epic. We want to have dramatic lighting. So the next thing we want to do is make sure we get this in a kind of portrait fashion and less square, just to give us a bit more real estate. So we're going to do --AR for aspect ratio, and we're going to do 3:2 for a 3:2. We're also going to do a --, and we're going to say V-4 for version 4 of Midjourney. And finally, we're going to do --Q, and we're going to put a 2 inside there for the quality of 2. So we're going to hit the enter or return key, and let's see what Midjourney comes back with, and if we need to start tweaking things to get a little bit more what we're looking for. Okay, after a few moments, there's our starting points. Let's open these up and take a quick look. And they already look pretty epic. You can see we've got some nice kind of dramatic lighting. And if you like what we have here, we can start off by using these. But before we do, let's just try a few other things. Let's say that we want it to be less photorealistic and more illustrative. Well, let's go ahead and remix it. So let's say we like the look of something like this second one. We're going to go for V2 for variation. And what we can do now is we can remix that prompt. So let's just go and add a few other things in. So let's just say illustration. Let's say cinematic. And let's try that. So let's submit that and see if we get any better results. And there we go. After a little bit of time, you can see we now start to get a little bit more dramatic. I think, in all honesty, these are probably a little bit too dramatic. So I would spend a little bit more time going through and finding the kind of results that I actually like. Now, like I say, I've already gone ahead and done quite a few different iterations using pretty much the same kind of prompts you've seen me using here. So ultimately, this is what we ended up with. Now, I'll put the prompt on screen right now, so if you want to copy this to get exactly the same starting point as me, you're not going to get the same image, but this is a good way to get started. You can grab that and start to use it. So all we need to do now is simply go ahead and save this to our computer. So we're going to open this in our browser to make sure you've got the full size version, and I'm going to just drag this over into Eagle. And there we go, we now have that inside Eagle. Now, if we take a look at this, you can see this isn't necessarily the biggest image. This is 1024 by 1024, so it's probably a little bit too small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another tool that I like to use. So open with, and we're going to grab this with Pixelmator Pro. Now, you could do this with Photoshop, you could do with this Affinity, you could do it with lots of different tools. But what we're going to do is we want to supersize this to give us a little bit more resolution and a little bit more quality. So all I need to do is come over to Image, and we're going to grab this Super Resolution option and select that. And this is now going to kind of quadruple the size of this. So if we zoom in, if you take a look on the left-hand side, that's the before. And as you can see, if we sort of scroll over, you can see we've got quite pixelated mountains, and you can definitely see where the pixelation is. And if we take a look on the right-hand side, it looks pretty darn good. And now we can go ahead, save it, and use it. Now I'm going to save this as a PNG to make sure I've got maximum quality. So I'm going to export this and just save this to my desktop. So let's just jump back into Figma, and let's go ahead and insert that image. So we're just going to simply grab the option to place video or image. We'll go and grab that from our desktop, and we'll pop that into our hero section. Now that already looks pretty cool, but what I want to do is I want to kind of zoom in a little bit on this. There's a little bit too much detail over on the right-hand side. So this is one of the reasons why supersizing can be incredibly useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to just position this a little bit better. So now we've got our basic starting point of our hero image. Next, let's make our life a little easier, and let's go ahead and just apply some grids to this. So we're going to come over, we're going to add a layout grid, we'll add it in there, we'll select the options, we'll come to grid and choose columns, and we're going to set this to be 12, and we're going to set the margin to 150 each side. And there we go. Now you can't really see that too well, so I'm going to quickly change the color to this sort of yellowy color and drop the opacity just so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so now we have a grid. Let's go ahead and lock the background so we don't accidentally move that around. And we've now got our starting point for our hero section of our website. So what do we want to do next? Well, we need to go ahead now and start adding in the various different components. We want to put navigation and those kinds of things. Let's just go ahead and grab the type tool. So just T on the keyboard. And we're going to just click to add our first in. And we're going to set this to be home. Now what we're going to do is change our typography. So for this, I'm going to be using Barlow, and we're going to set this to be something like 16, and we're going to just change the weight a little bit to make this semi-bold. That looks pretty good. So that now stands out quite nicely from the top section. So let's just go ahead and duplicate that a couple of times. There we go. So we can just change the text. Once we've got that, let's just grab all of these and let's tidy those up to make sure they're all aligned perfectly. And tidy up. And there we go. So we now have the top section. So now we've got our kind of navigation set up. Let's just create some really simple kind of logo. Let's just grab the text. We're going to simply Option or Alt click this, drag it over and position it on the left hand side, roughly towards the edge. And let's just change the name of this now to what we want. So we're going to call this Sky Tours. And we'll worry about colors and things in a moment. So let's just go and set that to be a little bit heavier. And let's go ahead and make it just a little bit bigger. So like 24. There we go. So let's just position that. And this is one of the things I love about using tools like Figma. Just aligning things is super easy. Okay, let's go ahead, turn our grid off a second, and let's see what we're working with. Now that stands out pretty well on the background, but let's just say you wanted to give it a little bit more contrast. What we could do is, and this is one of the little things I think is a nice little trick if you still want to have this kind of background image, is to go ahead and create a rectangle, drag that roughly over where you want it, and we'll just position that underneath. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this to be, in this example, black. We're going to apply a stroke to the bottom of this. So we're just going to change this over to be the bottom, and we're going to set this to be white or close to white as we want. So now we have a kind of separator at the top. Obviously, this looks way too harsh. So what we can do is, and what I would recommend doing, is just to go ahead and adjust the opacity on this. So we'll select it, and we'll set our opacity. We'll try something like 20% to start off with. Click outside. So now it gives us a bit of separation. We're going to do exactly the same then for the underline at the bottom. 20% for that. Try it. And there we go. So we now have a little bit more contrast between the background of our navigation and the actual background of our image, but it still allows that to kind of shine through. So now we've got the navigation all set up and the logo and everything. The next thing you want to do is create some form of color palette to use as part of our design. Now, you may not be great at creating color palettes, or you just may want to have a little bit of inspiration. This is where this section is going to be invaluable to you. What we're going to do is we're going to simply create a starting point color. So we're going to use the rectangle tool. And we're just going to drag this outside our actual artboard. Don't worry where you do this or what it looks like or anything. We just simply want to use this for grabbing the color. So we're selected. We can now go ahead, click the fill. We use the eyedropper tool, and we're going to grab a starting point color from within the photograph or the image we're using for our hero section. You may not have a color palette supplied to you, but you want something that kind of complements the design aesthetic that you're going for using these kinds of images. So we're going to look for this kind of a mid-light-ish kind of blue color. We're going to select that, and that now creates our starting point. We can grab that hex value from this, we can copy it, so Control or Command C, and we've now got a starting point color. So now we can work with creating complementary colors, creating analogous colors, or any other kind of tools for our color palette. But how do we go about doing it? This is really simple. Let's head over into an option called Adobe Color, totally free. And this allows us to create basic starting point color palettes or total color palettes. But there are other tools out there that do a very similar thing like coolers.co and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop in that color, that hexadecimal value as our starting point and hit the enter or return key. Now that puts the starting point color inside there. And if we take a look on the left-hand side, we can now choose various different kinds of color combinations. At the moment, this is analogous. We can choose monochromatic if we want to have a monochrome color palette. We can choose triad. We can choose complementary. We can go through split complementary, and we can go through until we find something that we kind of like the look of. Now, this looks pretty good to start off with, but it all looks a little bit dull because our starting point color was kind of mid. And I'll show you why in a moment. Let's change this over from the color mode from RGB, or red, green, and blue, into HSB, which is hue, saturation, and brightness. So this is a great way of being able to take those colors and adjust the brightness, the intensity of them, and all those colors and shades, whether we're using split complementary, analogous, or whatever, will update accordingly. Let's bump the brightness up just so we can kind of intensify these colors. As you can see, as we go through, it will adjust the color palette according to those kinds of values. If you want to change this to something like triad, you can do the same thing inside here. So we can keep on adjusting these values until we find something that complements exactly what you want. And let's adjust it until we get something like this. Now, I'm not too interested in these kind of pinky hues on the left-hand side, but I do like the contrast between the pale blue and the yellowy kind of color. So now what we can do is, if we want to make those a bit more vibrant, we can just push up the saturation until we get a slightly more saturated version. So now we've got a starting color palette that we can use. So we can grab that color again, so we'll copy that, jump back over into Figma, and we'll adjust this color as our starting point. So that now brightens that up a little bit. And what we can do is we can do the same. So we'll grab this and duplicate it. So again, Option or Alt drag, come back over into Adobe Color, select the second color, copy those values from there, head back over, select this, and adjust that color. And we've now got our two starting point colors. So we've got some nice opposing colors we can use, and they'll complement each other nicely in our design. But another thing you may want to do is create shades of these colors, various shading of the color. So let's grab our first blue. Let's copy that value from there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a free plugin that we can run inside Figma. So coming up to the plugins option, we'll select that. We'll choose plugin from there, and we'll do a search for foundation. And we want the foundation color generator. So we're going to select that. We'll click run. And this now opens up the options for creating our kind of shades. So what we want to do is double click, change the color. We're going to add this in there. Hit the enter or return, and there's our blue starting point color. You can see there's normal, and now we've got all these different shades of that same color. What we can do now is we can create styles, which will create styles inside the actual Figma file itself, so you can have these to reference at any point should you want to, which when you're working on more comprehensive designs is a great way of going. But what you can also do is just create a palette, which is a visual version of this. So we can click on that, and there we go. There's our palette. So what we can do is we can just move this to wherever we want inside our design. So we'll grab that. Let's just cut it from there a second. Let's move over to our new design, and we're going to paste that here. So there's our blue shade. Now we can repeat exactly the same process for our yellows. So what we've done now is we've created our color palettes, and we can use those now at any point we want to. We've got all the hexadecimal values. You've got the naming conventions applied to it. So if you do struggle with creating color palettes, this is a really good way of being able to create them easily, visually, and just tweak to get something really cool. So now we've done that, let's go ahead and start using them. First thing I want to do is change the sky tours, and I want to have the word tours in our yellow color. So let's go ahead and just highlight that. So what we can do now is just simply go to the fill, click, choose the eyedropper tool, and click to add that. And we've now added that color in, and we've given more contrast. So again, let's go ahead and use that same kind of setup. So what we can do now is we can just come over. We're going to create a really simple underline, and we're going to underline the word home. And we're going to set this to be 3 pixels high. And again, we're going to click on the stroke color, choose our eyedropper, choose our normal color, and there is our highlight. So we're starting to create a nice harmonious kind of color palette. The final thing I want to do at this point is I want this book now to be a button. So what we're going to do is press the R for the rectangle tool, and we're simply going to draw a rectangle behind this. And again, we're going to just set the background color, select our fill, then we just reposition this where we want it. So there's our book now button. So we can tweak this to the way we want. So again, let's come in, choose the color for the text. We're going to set that to be black. We're going to select our background for our button, and we're going to just slightly round these corners. We're going to just put a 4 pixel border or curve on there, and we've now created the button. So as you can see, by using these kinds of tools, we now have a very complementary color layout as part of our overall design. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and start using some more tools to create the call to action and those kinds of things, just to kind of get a bit of interest in this area. Before we do, let's go ahead and put our grid back on. Okay, so let's start working with ChatGPT now. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of create that strap line for the hero section. So let's ask it to do just that. Now, once you spat out the actual end result, let's just say you don't actually like it, or you just want to tweak it or refine it, or just get some other suggestions. This is where the whole point of a conversational tool like ChatGPT makes the process easy. So let's just say, give me 5 more variations. That will give us 5 different variations, but let's say we also want to keep it shorter. Let's just say, and make it shorter in length. So let's go ahead now and ask ChatGPT to go ahead, give us 5 shorter variations of that first one. And there we go. After a few moments, we now get some more variations. So for this example, I'm going to just go ahead and grab the one I think looks the best. So I'm going to grab this expert-led tours. Let's copy that. Let's head back over now into Figma, into our design. Press T on the keyboard to get our type tool. Let's go ahead, just paste that inside there. So we've got our starting point. And now we can just go ahead and make this bigger. That looks pretty good to start off with. Let's just round that off. And let's just bump that up a little bit. Semi-bold is okay, but let's make it extra bold. There we go. And what we can also do is tighten the spacing up a little bit in between. That's better. Actually, let's go make that just a little bit bigger. And this is the beauty of design. You're kind of going to tweak until you get exactly what you're happy with. There's no right and wrong way of doing this kind of thing. It is literally a case of tweaking until you get exactly what you want. Okay, so there's our starting point. We now have our kind of hero section starting to take shape. So the next thing we want to do is kind of have a little bit more of a call to action underneath. So let's just go ahead, Option drag click this, or Alt drag click this. We'll just select it all. We'll make it smaller. Let's try something like 36. And let's go and make this a little lighter. Let's try medium metallic. That actually looks quite nice. Let's go and change this from Barlow to Barlow semi-condensed, so it's a little bit tighter. There we go. So now let's head back over into ChatGPT and ask it to write a call to action. And as again, you can see it starts to give us some examples. Now let's just say we want some more. So another 5 variations on the same theme. And again, like I say, you can see this is kind of retaining the understanding of what it is we're actually asking for. There's about this ski tours website, there's the hero section, and it kind of keeps everything in keeping with the overall kind of storyline that we're creating here. And as you can see, this gives us some slightly short variations. So let's just ask it to do 5 more variations and make it a little longer. And as you can see, it starts to create longer call to actions. So I'm going to grab this second one. I quite like the look of this. So we're going to just grab that from there. Again, we're going to copy this, head back over into our design and just drop our strap line. Let's just tidy this up a little bit. And we can fine tune and tweak the design as we kind of go through. But you can see this is now starting to take shape nicely. So the next thing I want is to create that kind of call to action button that tells people to do something based upon what all this text, this hero image is all about. So like we've seen before, let's go and grab the rectangle tool with the R key on the keyboard. Let's drag this out to a rough shape. We're going to set this to be, in this example, 8 on the corners just to make it a little bit bigger or a little bit more rounded because it's more rounded on the corners. And again, we're going to stick to working with those same kind of color schemes. So we'll grab the background color, we'll select our eyedropper tool, grab our color, and we're already looking to create something that's quite harmonious, quite in keeping color-wise. Let's just grab this text so we can make our lives a little easier. We'll position that where we want, and we're going to change the text inside there to book now. Now, if I was doing this for real on a real project, I'd start using some of the more advanced tools you can use inside Figma, things like auto layout and so on. But I'm going to show you more about the design than using Figma, so I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. I am going to group these together, so our button is kind of grouped. Let's actually make that a little bit smaller again. Let's try something like 26 and make it just a little bit heavier. Try medium. That looks pretty good. Now we're cooking with gas, as they say. Okay, so there's our hero section starting to take shape. Let's go and turn our background off. Okay, so our hero section is now starting to take shape quite nicely. But there's one thing I'm noticing, and that is that our image itself is probably a little bit too overpowering, and therefore we're kind of losing the impact of the text that we have on there. So there's multiple different ways in which you could approach this. You could put a background overlay sort of over the image itself or just behind the text to make it stand off. But what I want to do is I want to make the background image just a little bit less imposing. So it still retains that kind of nice sort of aesthetic, but doesn't kind of vie for all of the attention. So there's a couple of easy ways you could approach this. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to adjust the opacity of this image. So before we do, let's make sure that the background color for our actual artboard is set to black and not any other color. So we'll select our artboard just by clicking on the left-hand side. You can see the fill is set to this blue color, so let's just click on that and set that to be black. Now you're not going to see any change at this point because we can't see the background itself, but once we've done that, we've now set the background to be black. And if we go ahead and select our image and adjust the opacity on this, let's try something like 80%, you can see that just darkens down a little bit, makes the text stand out, but we don't lose the visual aesthetic of that background image. Pretty cool little way of doing things. Okay, so now we've got this kind of laid out roughly the way we want. Let's select all three of these, make sure they're all aligned perfectly, and let's make sure that they tidy them up, just to make sure that we've got the spacing consistent between them. We are probably about 3/4 of the way through the design side of things. Now I want to kind of have a section at the bottom that says what, or gives reasons why you may want to use this particular company. Let's go ahead, select our background color again, let's put our grid back on, and let's just use that as a starting point. We're going to come back to our overall design and we're just going to make this a little bit bigger. We're going to drag it down a bit. Now the problem we're going to have here is quite busy underneath, so there's an easy way of dealing with that. We're going to use the rectangle tool again, so R on the keyboard. We're going to drag a rectangle roughly out across the bottom section, and we're just going to set the background color for now to be black. Okay. So you could leave it at this point if you want to have like a hard stop, but I don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this, we're going to come over to our color palette and we're going to set this to be linear gradient. And you see that now creates a gradient for us. What we want to do is set the background to be transparent and the bottom to be black in this example, or the dark color you want to use in the background of your design. So we'll select our bottom background color, we're going to set that to be black, so 100% black in this example. Let's grab our top color, doesn't matter what color we use here, we're going to simply grab the opacity and drop that down. And now we can use this to adjust the overall gradient inside our design. So I'm going to set something like this where it kind of falls off relatively quickly. So let's go back to our hero design. Let's go and disable that. And now you can see we get this nice kind of roll off between the overall background image. This gives us space now to be able to use this to put content on and not have it fighting with the background. Let's go ahead, lock that in place just to keep things nice and simple. Put our grid back on. What we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of lines and a little bit of text for each one of these. So let's go and grab the line tool. So grab that from the top. We're going to simply draw a rough line, holding the shift key down to constrain that side of things. And if we zoom in, we can see our line on there. So what we need to do is we're going to change our color for the stroke. We're going to set that to be white. And we're going to change the type of stroke that it is. So we're going to click on these three dots, change it from solid, and we're going to set it to be dashed. So now you can see we get this kind of dashed line. So now we've got our line in place. I want to create a little sort of circle or dot at the top of this just to kind of draw your eye to it. So to do that, we've got these two little lines underneath our stroke. Let's choose the right hand one, which is the end point. I'm going to choose the circle arrow, and you can see now we get this little circle point. What we're going to do is select it one more time, drop the opacity down to something like, let's try 60%. There you go. And this is a nice little trick I would recommend if you're using kind of any kind of things with design. Don't create a massive color palette inside your tools of choice for creating the design. Use opacity, so you can set white or a light gray, whatever you want, and then use opacity to make it lighter and therefore sort of hide in the background a little bit. It's much easier than actually creating tons and tons of colors. So with that being done, let's go and grab this, and we're going to duplicate this a couple of times. So again, we're going to hold that Option key down and we're going to drag that over. Position that where we need it so it lines up, and do the same again, which I think is roughly over there. We need to take that one back over there. There we go. So now we have our 3 little lines. If we want to, we can select those lines, make sure they're all perfectly lined up, so we can just align them at the bottom. There we go. So now we've got the basic starting point there. Let's again go and turn our background grid off so we can see what we're working with. We now have these points. So you can see now why I put that gradient in there. Just gives a little bit of sort of balance and separation. So next up, we want to create some text. So we'll text tool. We're going to drag this out roughly where we want it. So let's go and set these to be something like regular. We'll change these to be something like, let's say 18. And now we need to generate a little bit of content. So let's head back over into ChatGPT, and let's just ask it to give us some reasons why you may want to book with this kind of tour company. There we go. Right, 5 benefits for using Sky Tours as for your skiing holidays. And after a few moments, you can see this starts to spit out some content for us. Now, you probably want to spend a bit more time creating a little bit more sort of unique content. But for me, for this example, this is going to be perfectly fine. So we're going to grab our first little bit of content, hop back over and simply paste that into our design. Get rid of anything we don't want, like these bullet points. The nice thing with this is it kind of gives you this sort of first word, which we're going to make bold. So let's go ahead and adjust that and say we want to make that semi-bold for this example. And we're going to adjust the line spacing as well. So let's just select all that, adjust our line spacing. There we go. Let's close that up a little bit. Let's zoom out. Probably looks a bit small, to be honest. So what I might do is just bump the size of this up a little bit. Let's try something like 22. That looks better. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and Alt-click drag to duplicate this a couple of times to flesh out our overall design. And there we go. So now we can just jump back over into ChatGPT. So if we take a look now, we really are starting to take shape on how this all looks. Again, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to use that same kind of principle of reducing the opacity on various different aspects of this so it doesn't just pull your attention in every different direction. So for this, we're going to come over to our colors. We're going to set this, we're going to try something like 65%. That looks better. So you can see the information is still there, but it's not just really trying to pull you straight towards it. And what I might also do is go ahead and select our rectangle and lock that a little bit and just pull that up slightly. And again, go into the hero section, take a look at where we are position wise and maybe bring that down a little bit to kind of just balance things out ever so slightly. And one of the things that I always say when it comes to designing is use the rules to start off with and then throw them out the window. Does it look good with the same spacing with these 3 sections? No. In my opinion, it looks better where you've got the call to action button just a little bit further away from the sort of hero section text and the call to action text underneath it. Just looks a bit better in my opinion. And the same thing goes for these. Let's move them over a little bit because at the moment they look a little bit claustrophobic towards the edge of our lines. And as you can see, we now have a pretty good looking completed hero section, all done inside Figma using some free tools. We've got our color palette so we can use and reference these in any way that we want to. And we've got a really solid starting point that when we hand this off to a client to get their kind of feedback, they've got something they can use to visualize what it's actually going to look like as an end result, as opposed to just some generic photographs and some boring lorem ipsum text. We have things that actually would probably mean something to them, as in this example, a kind of tour operator for skiing holidays. Now, as always, all the applicable links are in the description below, and I would love to get your feedback. Do you like this kind of content? Would you like me to create more like this where we take a look at designing, how we can use various different tools to create our designs? Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, my name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.